We start in the local loony bin, where a pair of British Muppets, podcasters, are trying to get a face-to-face with a nut job before he's transferred to another facility. And before you can say, this'll go well, a doctor who looks and sounds a bit like a budget Albert Einstein with a Tom Selleck tash straight up says he's obsessed with this particular patient and actively lobbied the Illinois University to assign the psycho to himself. Man, this geezer's a walking red flag. Anyway, they pay a visit to said patient out in the courtyard, and the British guy unironically asks to stand closer to the psycho killer in a straitjacket. So they approach him whilst the floor is painted like a giant checkers board because reasons. The bloke introduces himself as Aaron Corey, who says he's been following him for years. And before you can say, way to turn the tables on a notorious convicted stalker, he pulls out a mask which sets off all the nearby nut jobs. He tells him to feel the mask, whilst I proceed to get triggered with flashbacks, because the last time I tried to feel the mask I got sued into oblivion, given an 8-month restraining order and told never to contact Jim Carrey again. Anyway, the tension builds to a climax as Aaron screams for him to say something. I'm giving up on you. Before we smash cut to the main titles, complete with a classic score composed by that bloke what made all them iconic films back in the day, like Village of the Damned and Ghost of Mars, whilst a giant inflatable pumpkin is inflated because reasons. Then a title card appears informing us that this is taking place in Haddonfield, Illinois. The two pasty Brits arrive at the gaff of that woman who survived all the other Halloween movies. Unfortunately, she's rather rude and totally won't open the gates to these gormless limey randos. Well, that is until the redhead offers her 3,000 big ones and the gate shoots open faster than Kamala Harris's legs. This Laurie Strode bird is older now by about 40 years and is quite offish with the peeps who are now dredging up her horrific past where she was almost gutted like a common hog at a meat market. Luckily, this whole sequence recaps the canon, in case you're a noob like me who's brand new to Halloween. And I mean the films, and not the holiday where nutters dress up in masks and black hoods to terrorise the neighbourhood. I mean, I'm well experienced in that area as I did a summer internship with Antifa. Bruh. Anyway, Laurie goes on to explain that this Mike Myers fella killed 5 people, and she just scoffs at the idea that these bleeding heart libtards would treat him as a, quote, human being. But to be honest, I had no idea that that bloke out of Austin Powers finally snapped and went on a killing spree years ago. I guess that's why there's never been an Austin Powers 4 and shit. She goes on to say that she's twice divorced, and to be fair, she fucking looks it and all, given this Michael Myers fella's been living in her head rent-free for 40 years. Her daughter was also taken away by the state at age 12 and she never got custody back. And at this point, it's all sounding a bit too much like an X-Factor sob story that would get her put straight through to judges' houses, for fuck's sake.
My current status at the moment is I am homeless.
No! Anyway, the guy wants her to talk to Mikey to get him to open up and shit. Like, why did he decide to play an ugly ogre as a Scottish person? And what the fuck was he thinking when writing The Love Guru? We then cut to Laurie's daughter Karen, her husband Ray, and daughter Alison. It all seems like a normal morning in a pleasant family setting, until Ray accidentally spills peanut butter on his penis because reasons. Though I can totally relate. I did that once, and pro tip, it's much easier to clean up with a dog. Although make sure your blinds are closed or else you'll be fined by the RSPCA and handed a lifetime ban on keeping animals. Anyway, Alison asks her mum if she's invited her granny Laurie to their dinner tonight, but Karen just lies to her face and says, yeah bro, I totally did, but she don't want to come to your stinking meal. Later, she's telling her mates about her granny's backstory and all about her family's horrible histories, as her friend Dave callously reckons that a couple peeps getting stabbed by one guy with a knife is not really that big a deal. And to be fair, he's totally right. I mean, that's just a normal Monday morning in Chicago, to be fair. At the school, we're introduced to a horny chubster forcing kisses on everyone. Yuck! Don't this guy know COVID's still about? Where's your gimp mask? Even the soulless psycho killer in this movie cares enough about public safety to mask up and protect Grandma, even as he's stabbing her through the arm. Anyway, Laurie's standing outside her granddaughter's class like a right creepy stalker, and gives her some cash and says go sod off to Mexico instead of going to college. Alison tells her she needs to finally say goodbye to that nutter what tried to kill her years ago and get over it already, because she's a bigger party pooper than my mate Dave, who actually shat himself at my 21st. I mean, who eats 2 slices of cake when you know you're lactose intolerant? What a wally! Anyway, that evening, Laurie sits and has a little cry in her car whilst watching Michael board a bus. Meanwhile, the family are out at dinner, where Alison's boyfriend says his dad is 7% Cherokee. which is almost as much as Elizabeth Warren. Anyway, the dad soon goes full field dumping, is cringier than my uncle on shrooms, until Laurie crashes the dinner and downs half a glass of wine because PTSD and shit. She breaks down at the table about seeing Mike Myers' shape. But to be fair to the fella, he is getting on a bit, and the death of Mini-Me hit the Canadian comic pretty hard. So the least we can do is not fat shame the fella and allow him a few comfort donuts now and then.
LOL!
Her mum then describes her wacky childhood via flashbacks, about how she learned how to fight and shoot and build cages in the basement before unsurprisingly being taken into care. And thus how she spent years trying to get over the paranoia and psychosis what her mum totally projected onto her. And before you can say that sounds kind of like Chelsea Clinton with generational TDS, we cut to a crashed bus with a bunch of mentals roaming around. A bloke gets out to see if they're okay, whilst the kid phones the cops when he doesn't come back for a while, and seems to have abandoned him quicker than my own dad when he said he was popping out to get some milk and never came back. I mean, I know milk is hard to get nowadays given these eco-loons keep trashing the stuff all over the floors, but 25 years has taken the piss, son. Just grab some oat milk and come raise your boy, damn it. Anyway, the scared kid comes across a half-dead prison guard who tells him to run. Until he comes across an innocent man who specifically says don't shoot, but the kid does anyway because he fucking hates mustachioed men handcuffed to buses. And before you can say, what's a 12-year-old got against Tom Selleck, he gets his neck snapped like a twig when some psycho pops up in the back of his dad's motor and soon gets sweet revenge on the Magnum PI murderer killer. Later, a cop called Frank Hawkins stumbles on some poor sap killed by hypothyroidism when his giant neck goiter went left untreated for too long, before finding the wounded Einstein cosplayer asking if he escaped. But the fucker doesn't even say who he's talking about. Then a random title card pops up telling us it's now October 31st. And those British buggers visit Michael's sister's grave, where we're shown via flashback how he stabbed up his nudie sis and then stared at her bloody jubblies whilst giving me a raging lob on. Anyway, then a black cowboy is told Mike Myers is on the loose and about to make a second season of the Pentavariate and must be fucking stopped at all costs. Bruh. The cop states it's 40 years to the day since all the OG killings also took place on October 31st, which probably doesn't bode well for him this evening, given they're in a horror film literally called Halloween. Elsewhere, the boring-ass Brits stop at a gas station and the girl asks if he wants anything from the shop. And tragically, he misses the golden opportunity to say, Cornetto. Call themselves Brits. Anyway, she needs to drop a steaming deuce, so goes into the bathroom and finds the grottiest toilet since Trainspotting. Or my brother's bog on Taco Bell night. Suddenly, some fucker walks in and tries to get into her stall, which is extra worrying given the English bloke just found the store clerk dead and with a bigger gaping jaw than a sex-starved nun ending a celibacy stint after Lent. Matron. And fuck me, there's bodies everywhere. Back in the bathroom, this creepy weirdo drops a bunch of teeth above her door and promptly solves her constipation issues by scaring the shit out of her. And she can barely pull up her drawers before she's under attack and humps the floor before getting an ankle massage from a serial killer. Aaron then busts in and tries to take on that Canadian comedian what was big in the 80s, but unfortunately he's literally bigger than him now, and so proceeds to get smacked around worse than my mum in her second marriage. Please come back, Dad. Anyway, with Aaron rendered uselessly unconscious, Dana is then strangled, but manages to show off her wicked dancing skills before she croaks by doing an Irish jig and then going limp. The bloke what played Wayne in Wayne's World then puts his old mask on again, which is unsurprising really, because we know from Austin Powers that this guy loves dressing up in latex masks. Anyway, back at Laurie's gaff, turns out she's got a secret dungeon under her kitchen because reasons. And paranoia, I guess. So she breaks into her daughter's home to test their security, which consists of the square root of diddly and squat, although her hubby reckons it's all okay because he knows jiu-jitsu and can totally protect his family. Not a joke. She tells them that the bus crashed, but they reckon she's a nut job coming around here brandishing guns and undermining her husband's skills in martial artistries. Bruh. Always one step behind, this Hawkins fella stops for some gas and finds all the corpses, as well as that limey gal's lifeless body, who certainly ain't dancing or doing any more Michael Flatley river dance routines, that's for sure. The random black cowboy finds a hospital gown, so totally knows this is the work of that Michael fella. Before Hawkins, a useless cop, tells him he was there 40 years ago on that night and was probably fucking useless there as well. But he's determined to get this guy once and for all. That night, two kids bump into a giant monster, but quickly realise it's just a Michael Myers Halloween cosplayer and so happily run off, as he goes and picks up a hammer from an open shed. You know, if you left that thing open in England, all your hose would be gone before you could say, sorry love, I'm out of cash. Anyway, then he enters a house and attacks an innocent chair, Because as we all know, there's nothing as evil as kitchen furniture. Just ask my tin opener what always manages to cut my pinky whenever I try to pry open that blasted corned beef can after I keep losing that key thingy.
Fuck you!
Then he walks past a crying baby and decides not to kill it, despite having no problems emptying that preteen scrote from earlier. Because reasons. Outside, that Halloween thing is in full swing, including the score. And luckily, this is the one night of the year that he can openly wear that mask without getting dodgy looks from people thinking he might be a wrong'un. And with said mask, he can now hide in plain sight, like a fox in a henhouse, or a criminal in Congress. And after deep-throating a random woman, also because reasons, we cut to the school disco where Alison calls her friend Vicky, who's stuck doing a bit of babysitting for a kid that I'm assuming is not allowed to go out trick-or-treating with his friends and instead has to stay home and clip his toenails.
Aww.
Then that Alison bird gets an incoming call from someone called Grandmother. And before you can say what kind of psychos that own Nan in their phone under the name Grandmother, she totally just ignores it anyway. Elsewhere, her friend Vicky tells a small boy that she nannies lots of loser kids like him, and then puts him to bed before saying he's her favourite loser kid what she babysits for. Again, not a joke. Back at the teeny bopper discotheque, Alison catches her boyfriend chatting up some skirt in the crowd. But he reckons she's got the wrong end of the stick, and so naturally he throws her phone in the punch bowl before she walks out like a ride drama queen. Back at the house with that blonde girl who's unnecessarily rude to children, she thinks she hears the noise while snogging her boyfriend Dave, and so promptly sends him off to investigate. The tiny child, who is just completely disrespected in his own fucking house, starts jumping up and down on the stairs, saying he just saw that boogeyman bloke outside his bedroom and shit. And before you can say, right, well maybe you should just sleep down here with us tonight, she totally dismisses him and goes to look herself. She then proceeds to further traumatise the child, what she's supposed to be protecting from physical and mental harm for one evening, by pretending she's being attacked by the boogeyman, before Dave trashes a random motorbike in the garage while she totally gets slashed up by Michael Myers in Goldmember. Hilariously, the young kid who she spent the whole night saying hurty words to promptly gets the fuck out of Dodge, and leaves her disrespectful ass to her slaughtering, as Mikey boy grabs her by the socks. It looks like it's curtains for this budget scream queen, what looks a bit like a young Starbuck from the recent BSG reboot a few years ago.
Bruh.
Meanwhile, Laurie is listening to the police scanner and hot-tails it over there, as Hawkins, the useless cop, arrives and goes full Scooby-Doo by exposing the ghost as just some rando in bedsheets. But this time, the cheeky cheating culprit is a dead girl covered in blood. I must have missed that episode back in the day. Anyway, Laurie catches the Austin Powers actor looking right at her, and so mindlessly shoots into the window, where it turns out he's tricked her into blowing away a mirror and getting herself 7 years of bad luck in the process. Man, this guy's a right sly devil. Somehow, Hawkins the useless cop is extra useless now, and can't even stop him slowly walking downstairs, despite aiming right at his head and literally having the advantage of bringing a gun to a knife fight. Again somehow, the mentally retarded killer, what walks at a snail's pace, beats him out of the house, before he finds that poor Dave fella nailed to the wall by his freaking head. And because she ain't quite as useless as him, Laurie manages to shoot a slug into Mikey boy before Hawkins then outdoes himself in the field of incompetence by sneaking up on and startling a paranoid abuse survivor armed with a loaded gun. And then he has the cheek to chide her about it.
Bruh.
Then budget Albert Einstein with a Tom Selleck tash turns up, asking where his favourite Canadian actor's at. And before you can say, I don't know, but he better not be off writing a Love Guru 2 screenplay, Laurie begs the coppers to do something, before Tommy Einstein simps over her and almost to the point of asking her for a fucking autograph.
What?
He tells her, and us, that Officer Hawkins was the first responding deputy on that fateful night all those years ago, and was indeed still useless even back then, because he totally stopped some fella called Loomis from killing Michael back in 78, and if he hadn't, those two teens, a small boy and a British twat what loves Irish dancing, would totally all still be alive right now. Fuck's sake, Hawkins. Patrolling the neighbourhood, Budget Einstein tells Frank that he mustn't kill Mike because he's property of the state, and also totally my lifelong project, bro. Later, Laurie tries to get in touch with Alison to warn her that a giant nutter in a stinky mask is on the loose, but she's too busy trying to fight off her own stinky stalker in the form of that chubster from school what loves forcibly planting smackers on everyone. But she kicks him to the curb before he squeals like a pig when finally getting gutted like a common hog. And in that moment, Alison realises that her nutty granny was right all along, and now that Canadian comic is totally after her. And presumably, not to ask her to audition for a Cat in the Hat sequel. Hilariously, she runs off to tell Hawkins, the useless cop, where the killer is, who proceeds to do fuck all about it, whilst the Strode family lock themselves inside her fortified gaff, as hubby Ray desperately tries to remember his jiu-jitsu moves. In the secret dungeon under the kitchen, turns out Laurie stashed a fuck ton of guns, and enough heat to make an NRA gun nut come.
Nice.
Meanwhile, Hawkins, the useless cop, is such a bad driver that he knocks over a poor bloke whilst trying to drive Alison back home. Unfortunately, the poor bloke is that Mike Myers fella, and the Einstein doc tells him he's only gone and killed him, even after he specifically told him to do anything but that one thing. Fuck's sake, Hawkins! Unfortunately, Frank's just like that kid from earlier and still won't listen to the specific instructions given by that kraut what invented E=mc², and really wants to blow the geezer's brains out, so naturally Einstein stabs the useless fuck in the arm, and then a few more times in the neck for being so utterly useless, whilst Alison screams helplessly in the car behind. And in a shocking twist, Einstein strokes Michael's face before putting on his mask and stealing his identity. Just like that guy did to me when he 3D printed a mask of my face and shot up a bank. But of course nobody believed me, so I got done for it. Liberties! The fact they found 100k under my floorboards the next morning was a total coincidence, bro. Anyway, turns out Einstein wants to keep him alive in order to study him and his brand of evil, or some shit. Though if he wanted to study evil, he could have just watched reliable sources on CNN for 24 hours straight. So she tries to bargain her way out of being kidnapped by a budget German brainiac what loves private investigating, by saying she'll totally tell him the one word Michael said to her shortly before gutting that horny chubster like a common hog. Apparently he's desperate to know, because Michael's always blanked him for 40 odd years during his work with him. But before you can say, was the word cunty McFarclark, Mikey wakes up and straight up squashes budget Einstein against the steering wheel, and it looks like it's curtains for the #1 German Tom Selleck cosplayer in all of Haddonfield, Illinois. Meanwhile, Alison escapes into the woods before the curtains indeed come down on Albert Selleck, but not before he begs Michael to, quote, say something. I'm giving up on you. Before stamping on his head, which explodes like a fleshy watermelon. 2 other cops find the mushed up body, whilst the family are now holed up in Laurie's gaff, as a badass granny prepares the house for a final showdown with that fat bastard guy. Unfortunately, her son-in-law is a giant mogadon, and immediately exits the fortified house to approach a suspicious police car, what is not moving or making any kind of noise at all. Naturally, he finds both cops inside the car dead in my soul when my niece asks me what the fuck a Keenan and Kel is, and before you can say, who loves orange soda, Michael takes out the hubby before he can bust out his super deadly jiu-jitsu moves on his ass. Fucking hell, why is everyone so bloody useless in this movie? Laurie sends her daughter down to the dungeon under the house, and she's understandably a bit hesitant, because the last time a family member sent their daughter under the house, she didn't come back up for 20 years. Bruh. Anyway, Mikey seems to somehow get the better of Laurie, who's prepared for this day for 40 years, despite her being armed with a giant fuck-off shotgun and despite him being locked behind an actual door. But she does at least manage to blast his fingers off. Unfortunately, those were his fingering fingers, and now he's well pissed off he won't be able to turn the local floozies into Super Soaker 5000s, and so goes after them even harder, whilst Laurie decides she hates the floor and does some interior decorating from underneath the gaff. For some balmy reason, I assume to progress the plot, they proceed to exit the heavily fortified dungeon, what she spent 40 years preparing and stocking up, before stalking various rooms in the house, in a vain attempt to hold to account the guy what subjected the world to the love guru 14 years ago.
Fuck you!
Meanwhile, Alison is still in the woods and randomly gets attacked by close-up shots of harmless mannequins. Back at the house, Michael finally stops hiding like a little bitch and attacks Laurie and stabs her with her own knife, before she bites off more of his fingers, so now he can't do any bowling either. Fuck's sake, no fingering or social sports. Oh, she's gone too far this time. So naturally, he grabs her face and lobs her out the fucking window. Alison finally arrives, fresh from getting mobbed by motionless mannequins, and must have missed her granny getting totally defenestrated by that giant Canadian nutter outside. Speaking of nutters, she yells out for her nan by screaming the actual word grandmother out of the top of her lungs, until her own mum pops out of the kitchen dungeon and tells her to zip it, because you're totally going to get us all found and killed, bro. After dragging her in and locking the door, they start to panic after realising they're now locked in a dark cage, even though Laurie literally showed them all earlier the fuck ton of guns and armoury she's kept down there for exactly this specific occasion. Reluctantly, the mum finally nuts up and picks up a shooter after remembering her childhood training, just as Michael rips off the kitchen hatch before she lets loose and blows a hole in his side. but that barely slows the fucking down. And neither does a few more shanks from Laurie. And it seems this Canadian comic is fucking unstoppable. Well, that is until she knocks him down with a frying pan. The strongest of all kitchen utensils! And they all jump out, but of course he grabs an ankle in a desperate attempt to escape, because he totally suffers from claustrophobia, bro. But united, they all beat him back until Laurie activates a steel bar trap, locking him in, while she then ignites a gas pipe as he stands there hotter than Dua Lipa on a beach. And they proceed to torch the whole house to make sure he's dead, just like that time I set fire to my cabin when I lost sight of that hairy house spider and decided to take no freaking chances. And we end on the image of the 3 Strode women, physically blooded and beaten, but spiritually undefeated. And that's it. That's the plot, and that's your lot. Man, I had no idea Canadians were so violent. This Mike Myers fella always looks so down to earth in the bonus features of the Shrek DVDs. I mean, I know he always liked dressing up in latex masks, but this is taking the fucking piss, son. Anyway, consider ringing that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Say hello in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.